Hey, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, looks like we have another little controversy on our hands, and that is about whether a victim of an accident should be moved or not. Well, let's try to set some of the parameters by which you would judge a situation like this. Can you get an ambulance? If you can, should you wait? Is the ambulance service regular? Is it within minutes? Does it have a qualified team to handle any accident trauma? If it does, great. Do you have a means of getting in touch with them? Do they have a proper call service? Telephone, emergency? How good is it? Right. Well, there we are with our ideal scene. So probably somewhere in, say, the US or my usual big three, Australia, I don't know, Germany, UK, all of these places, they're so well set up, aren't they? They enjoy New Zealand, wonderful, wonderful free site. America, wonderful, but not free. But when that team are called out in an ambulance, boy, even the traffic moves over, and that's the law in America, which I am most familiar with. In the law, you hear that siren and you get over and stop and let the guy driving the ambulance steam straight through. That's the law, and it's finally a law that makes sense. Now let's fast forward it, or is it fast reverse, to the other day when we were faced with making a decision. What did we find? We were going along the road between one small town and another. The another didn't have a hospital. It would have been a long drive, about an hour to get to Ubay. Going back the other way was about 6-10 minutes. So, what are we faced with when we get there? Now, let me read, if I can find some of the criticisms, I would read them. But essentially, what they're saying is this, and they are correct. They're correct in an ideal situation. Don't move an accident victim because he may have suffered some spinal injury, and if you move him and it's that final straw that breaks the accident victim's back, he may never walk again, and you will have made a terrible decision. Now, it's not that I'm an expert in first aid, but I know how to put someone into the recovery position so that they don't hoop up in their own mouth and choke on their own vomit. I know to try to find if they are unconscious. I know when someone is unconscious. I know when they're bleeding. I know where they're bleeding from. I can observe. I'm relatively intelligent person, and I can make judgment calls. Every day we are required to make judgment calls on any number of things, but rarely do we find that we are called upon to make a judgment call of action or no action at the scene of an accident. Now, we've been criticized heavily by many people, probably 6 or possibly 8 people. Absolutely no, you do not move an accident victim unless there's an expert called to the site. So what you do is, they didn't mention anything. Surprisingly, they mentioned nothing about getting the person into the recovery position, making him comfortable, making sure that he is not causing another accident, stuff like that, all of which you could do without singly moving him at all. And then you stand there and wait. Of course, you have a cell phone and you are calling on a regular 999. In the UK, it's 999. You're calling on a regular service where there is someone waiting, and they're going to send. All they want to know is, where is the accident? We'll be with you in moments, momentarily. And then almost, in many cases, you'll almost hear the siren start up wherever it's coming from, and you'll hear it in the distance. Very encouraging, very reassuring, and you'll know that you've done the right thing. Now, let's look at what Beth and I were faced with when we made such a decision as to whether to move an accident victim. The young man was a motorcyclist. He was riding without a helmet, I believe. He had had a few drinks, and he had gone into a safety barrier because he told us later that actually he nodded off at the handlebars. It never sounds the same, does it, when you say, if you say he nodded off at the wheel, he fell asleep at the wheel, it makes sense. But falling asleep at the handlebars seems to have a sense of unreality. But I'm not trivializing the situation, just bringing in a little humour, which always gets me in trouble, by the way. So, we're looking down at the man. He is in, coincidentally, he is already in the recovery position, and he is moving. I looked at him, I examined him as best I could. I saw that there were a few superficial wounds on his legs, which would require probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 stitches, nothing that would stop him from moving. Now, where are we? Well, we're not in say, we're not on Ventura Boulevard, where you can have an ambulance and a heart transplant within minutes. We're not talking about that. We're talking about being between 2 small towns in the Philippines, and on Bohol, which is even smaller. Now, to have any serious work done, you would normally have to go to Tagbilaran, 3 hours away. Right, so what's the nearest option? Second best option would be to Ubay, which is probably over an hour away. First option is the small hospital, which is just on the outside edge of Taliban. That's about 8 or 10 minutes away. Now we have a bus where he can lay out comfortably. Now here's where the judgment call comes in. He's got head injuries. That is very obvious, and you can see that in the video. He's got head injuries where he's had a crack on the back of the head, he's got a cut there which will require a few stitches, he's got some on the top of the head, and he's been hit full on the forehead. So it's a damn good choice, a damn good chance, not choice, that he's got concussion. But he is still coherent and talking. And he had passed out momentarily, and by the time I turned the bus around to go to Taliban, he was already standing up. Have you got that? He was standing up, and he was not showing any pain. But of course, he's had a few drinks and a blow on the head. Pretty certain that disorientation would be a natural thing. So we actually get him into the bus in a comfortable position, and about 8 minutes later he's in the ER, emergency room, in Taliban, in the hospital there. Did we do the right thing? What could go wrong? Everything could go wrong. Every damn thing that you can think of can go wrong. What would we have done? What would anybody there have done that was standing there looking down at the guy? The best thing that they did was, he had fallen over, hit the barrier, fallen over with the bike on top of him. Right? It was not a huge, horrendous crash where he hit somebody else, where you added the velocity that each was going and ended up with a crash speed of, I don't know, 100 miles an hour. We did what we thought was the right thing to do, and we stand by that. And the experts who are saying, no, absolutely wrong, have no idea of what is happening here. You just have no idea. Does that mean that I'm being extreme? Oh, it's him being so right again, so egotistical. A little while ago, an accident happened to my brother-in-law, Timio, and he needed help in the middle of the night because at the time that he had his accident, an ambulance wasn't called. Now, listen to this. 3 o'clock in the morning, we get a call. Can you come and help? And we get into the truck and we go down there and we do just that. So, what is it? Well, Timio and his wife had had an accident coming down a hill and were bleeding and had injuries to below the waist, shall we say, for Timio's wife. Timio also had some superficial injuries as well, which he, surprisingly, he never, despite our telling him that he should get examined, he didn't do that, and he just went with his wife. We got them to the hospital, the same hospital as we took this young man, and they examined them and said they should go. I think it was it Ubay, Beth, or Tagbilaran?
Tagbilaran.
They went to Tagbilaran. So they went to Tagbilaran. Now, in their condition, certainly going to Tagbilaran in our little red in the back being bumped was not an option. So we have to get an ambulance. Now, let's look at how that went, okay? We're actually at ER at the hospital in Talabon, which is where we took this young man. The doctor has said she should go to Tagbilaran. Okay? Now, that should be easy enough, shouldn't it? Why don't you just walk outside and call over to that ambulance driver that's snoozing in the front seat and say, get over here. That wasn't the case. No. The ambulance is not kept at the hospital. It's kept at the, what is that hall where we see the ambulances, honey?
That's different. That's the government ambulance, but the hospital has its own ambulance. But
and where was it?
I think it's in Tagbilaran, if I'm not mistaken.
It was in Tagbilaran?
Yeah, there's another passenger being...
So, the ambulance for the hospital, the ambulance was apparently already in Tagbilaran, which kind of complicates things, doesn't it? So next is another judgment call. Yes, dear?
Nothing.
Another judgment call. What shall we do? Well, there's a private service of ambulances. Let's call them. And that's what we did. We called them. Now, well, yes, sir. Well, yes, you can have the ambulance, but we're out of gas. The ambulance is out of gas. How will we handle that, sir? Well, can you pay for the gas? Certainly we can pay for the gas. Okay, now this is the service that you guys who are sitting there in fully organized Western situations, medically speaking, are sitting in judgment and saying, oh, absolutely, you've got to stand there with the person, put a pillow under their head and wait for the ambulance. Wait for a skilled, and sorry if I have a touch of facetious here, but are you even aware that this is what it's like in a third world country? Have you ever tried to get medical assistance? It's not the same. You don't go to a hospital. When you go to a hospital, you travel long corridors where on either side of the corridor is tiny offices, and they have their own receptionist, and they have a note on the door, a little sign on the door, and it tells you what that person does. What is he skilled at? Then you go in there, and you can't make an appointment. You have to go first come, first served. And what can that mean? Well, in the case, say, of Baby Faith. Baby Faith's mom, a most loving, adoring mother of that little child facing so many challenges, and the grandmother of Baby Faith, go outside, wait on the national highway for a bus. And when the bus comes along, they get onto the bus, and the bus drives for about 3 hours. When it gets to the ICM mall, they get on a tricycle, and the tricycle drives a very bumpy path on very bumpy roads with that little girl, and they take her to a hospital. Then when they get to the hospital, they find the right office in the right corridor on the right floor. And what do they find there? The doctor is out and is not going to be back that day. So they get back into the tricycle for their bumpy ride back to the ICM mall and possibly have something to eat. Then they get on a bus and they drive home for another 3 hours. Welcome to the Philippines. Welcome to Bohol and the Philippines. Now, let's get back to this boy who is lying on the ground. What are you going to do? You're going to stand there and wait? We didn't. We didn't. We watched him stand up. We watched him get into our bus, groggy for sure, and bleeding for sure. And we got him to the hospital, to ER, where they were able to examine him. We still haven't had any news from that because we don't have a contact number, I'm afraid. But he certainly has been admitted, and they will do some kind of a scan on his head. Not going to do an x-ray, are they? Well, at least I don't think so. But they have got a scanning set up there, equipment, and they'll be able to find out what the head injuries are. What I know is that he had a bump the size of a few fingers like this, on the front of his head, and some stitches needed at the back. He had 2 or 3 cuts to the legs. So the accident that he had, the way that it looked to us, was that he had come off his bike, and the worst thing that he'd done was hit his head. Concussion, excuse me, and some little head injuries, like, hopefully. And that's how we haven't heard anything back. We're going to check tomorrow, and we'll try to find out and do an update. But that is what life in this little part of the Philippines is like. People have warned me many times, well, what's going to happen, Terence, if you get bit by that cobra? Well, maybe I'll die. And maybe I won't. And what are we going to do? Are we going to live? Are we going to go over this again, living in fear that something might happen? Don't go out on the road because people are crazy drivers. What? The biggest precaution that we take is that we try, and I say the emphasis is on try, we try not to drive at night. And the reason that we do that is several. One is that approximately 40, 50, maybe sometimes on a bad night, 60% of the motorcyclists are just local riders going through in their own little barangay, and they're just going to, hey mom, I'm just going to pop out and go, well, or whatever the Filipino is for that. I'm sure that they probably don't have a way that you can say, oh mother, I'm just going to pop out and do this. But they only think in terms of I'm just going across the road. I'm just going 2 kilometers down the mile. What's the hassle? I can see my way. And they don't think about the fact that they can't be seen. Also, the main road, the national highway, which is between Taliban and Etafi, which is the one that takes us home, is like a meeting place for people hanging out at night, and they do so next to the road. Now, why is this a bother to you? Well, because it's in the culture, it's in the psyche that they sit with their butt on the concrete. That means if there's something coming the other way who doesn't know where the dip switch is on his dashboard, on his steering column, you'll be heading into that black hole that's right next to those blazing lights. And if you don't slow down drastically, you might clip somebody that's sitting with their butt on the concrete. So we choose, whenever is possible, not to drive at night. And if we do drive at night, it's with great caution and not a little bit of apprehension. So, think what you're saying when you come out and be so emphatic about the information that you are imparting. The one piece of sanity for me was, hey fellas, we all know that you shouldn't move anyone that's been involved in an accident, but how accessible is an ambulance? And are you going to stand there and watch a guy die because you're doing the right thing? We chose not to. And we chose to move that boy and get him to a hospital. Right or wrong, we took action. Now here's a little postscript for you for America. A neighbor of mine who was a motorcycle rider stopped in good time at a traffic light in California and was sitting there minding his own business, as they say, waiting for the traffic light to change, when somebody who was not paying any attention rear-ended him, knocking him to the ground and causing him severe injuries. He was telling me, he recovered, but he was telling me later that as he lay on the ground with his helmet on and blood streaming into his eyes, he asked people for help. And no one would touch him for fear that they might do something wrong. After that, it caught my attention in the paper once. It caught my attention how trained medical nurses, trained nurses who are actually working in the emergency room are afraid if they offer some help at the scene of an accident and anything goes wrong, such is the legal system in America, as crazy as it is, they can be sued for what went wrong. So, they say, I know what to do, but I ain't going to do it. So we did what we did. We're not afraid to take responsibility for it. And the way that it's looking, it all turned out right. Try to think about this when you are so quick to make a judgment. Try to work out what would you have done in that situation, because from the ones that said absolutely don't touch him, that boy might have died of those injuries. But of course, the upside of it is that you would have done the right thing. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. As wrong as ever. Bye for now.